I suppose a bit like the last speaker, I feel kind of out of my depth when you look at all of the room with entrepreneurs and engineers and all the fantastic things that they're doing in healthcare. But however, I'll endeavour to put our message across. So I suppose for all of you who don't know me, my name is Terence Morgan. We have a company in the city centre called GHR Consulting. We look at training, HR services, primarily for the SME, but we work with larger businesses as well. Could I just start with two thank yous? I'd just like to thank the actual iHubs and Maria for inviting us along today. This is my second time here, and I'm of an age that I remember this being the GMIT back in the day. And it's just amazing to see Galway City now with so many, I suppose, innovation hubs with two universities, with Platform 94, with the Portershed, with Galway Chamber. I suppose we're well known for years for medtech, for a long number of years, but certainly the tech industry now as well. It's just really, really heartening to see the amount of volume that's coming out. So we work with a lot of startups, so it's just amazing to see the city and the West progressing like that. Could I also thank my colleague Emer Kelly, who's with me this morning. She managed to get what is usually a 90-minute presentation, to be fair, into about 10 minutes. So she did all the heavy lifting on this. I'm just here to roll it out to you guys. So briefly, as I said, this is who we are. This is our founder and CEO beside me there, Rory Guckian from Salthill. Rory returned back to Galway about 10 years ago. Been working as a HR manager, but I suppose he was one of those guys that I call that had that entrepreneurial itch. And he needed to scratch, and he wanted to try and design a really good service for small to medium-sized business, primarily in this part of the world, but we do have clients all over the west of Ireland, the south, the northeast, and some in the UK now as well. Very briefly on the agenda, going to quick look at an employment law overview. We're going to look at some contracts and handbooks, which are your staples, some training development, some legislative changes, a WRC case, our services, and questions. What I hope it won't be is death by PowerPoint. I'm not going to read through employment law legislation and put you all to sleep after you've had your lunch, so we'll try and keep it fairly relevant if we can. So as I said, Rory founded the business. We have a team of 6 now in the consultancy team down in Dominic Street, founded in 2019. I joined Rory then in 2022, and it's been a bit of a journey since then, I must say. Really enjoyable, something we're very proud of our brand, and if we can help anybody, it's very much the ethos of the company that we would do that. But I was always say to people in hubs like this, not everything is an invoice. You can pick up the phone. I'll put up my contact details at the end. Sometimes people just need a steer. Whether you're a startup or an established company, please reach out. We're more than happy to give you some advice and guidance if you need it. As you can see, we're very much involved in the community. Among other sponsors, we look after Galway United. We look after Salthill Nantacar GA, Coloshdania, and the Salthill Fives was a big project that came back a couple of years ago under very much the tutelage of my business partner, Rory. The only thing we disagree on is Rory calls that ball that they kick along the ground football, and I call it soccer because I'm a GA man. But everything else we pretty much agree on. I don't think we'll ever agree on that. Some of our clients, you'll probably know some of those brands there. So we work with a lot of established companies, but also across all industries. So the employment law overview. We try to summarize this for people. Sometimes we'll have HR managers in the room. Sometimes we'll have people who don't really have a knowledge of HR. So try to highlight what's important. So with employment law, it's really important to understand it's the rights and entitlements of the employees on the left hand, and it's the obligations of the employers on the other hand. I'll often meet historic West of Ireland, maybe businesses who've never introduced any documentation into their business. And they don't want to do it because they have a fear of upsetting the workforce or maybe changing the vibe. Let me assure you of this, if nothing else. You're always better with something in place than nothing at all. Because if you don't have something in writing, it really comes down to precedent, custom and practice, and you're dealing with rules that are made up by an employee's habits rather than something you want to put in place as an employer. I don't want to scare you all out the door, but they are the facts. And when you see the WRC cases, it's all about process and procedure. With human resources, we were with hopefully a new client this morning who has grown down in Lisbon. The CEO was trying to do the HR as well, but he now recognizes that he'd rather put his time into something else than, carrying out performance appraisals and drafting up contracts, which, to be fair, I thought was was a wise move for the business. And also, it's really important to keep up to date and compliant with legislation. Unfortunately for you guys as business owners or managers, I suppose I was too busy is not an excuse for missing something that has changed. So with employment law legislation, the one thing I always like to highlight is there is roughly about 30 pieces of legislation in general for employment law. The one common thing about all of these is these are all in place for employees and employees only. The one act you will never see up there is the Employers Act 2024. It doesn't exist. That's why it's so important that the written word is in place, the policy, the procedure, and the contract. As myself and Emer were chatting earlier, no matter what phone call we get to our office, Emer is part of our consultancy team. Her first question will be, what does your policy say? And we get a number of answers to that from, I don't know, I don't have one, I can't find it, or many other answers. That is the starting point, and that is the foundation of the house. All of these are evolving. We've had newer legislation come in the last number of years, which we'll cover. Stuff like right to disconnect, people sending emails in the evening, working from home obviously has been a huge change in our society. The HR needs to keep up with that as well. Most companies now I speak to will have somebody hybrid, will have somebody remote, but it's evolved rather than something that's been structured. It's really important that you have a structure in place and you follow natural justice when it comes with dealing stuff like this. So for anybody with a HR background, I'll just apologize for the next 3 minutes. This is pretty basic stuff. But as I say to everyone else, sometimes people come to me and talk about the culture, their business, and how they want to evolve and develop their team. I bring it right back and say, first question, do you have contracts and handbooks in place? You'd be surprised the amount of people that don't. You can't build a house without the foundation. This is the most important thing that you can do. Have a contract of employment in place for all your employees, whether you have 1 staff or 1,000 staff, and have some kind of an appendix of policies, a HR manual, a staff handbook, which outlines very simple rules. By law, you are absolutely legally required to offer a contract of employment within 5 days of commencement of employment, and you also must offer a copy of their disciplinary, grievance, appeals, and dignity at work. That's non-negotiable. After that, you can talk about specifics in your business. The company we will say with this morning have company vehicles. So we discussed trackers, we discussed, damage to company vans, etc. So what I would say to you always about your handbook is, you know what, if it's an operational part of your day, it needs to be reflected in a policy. What I often see sometimes when I go to smaller businesses is they have borrowed the handbook from a relation or a friend. One of the funniest ones I saw was with the hairdressers in East Galway, quite a large business, but she had borrowed it obviously from her brother who has a construction company, because the back policy spoke about the size of lifting buckets and diggers, not relevant to hairdressers. You'd be as well off not to have that in it. So it always got to be bespoke and work. With the contract of employment, the biggest waste of time for employers is chasing someone to get a signature. So say you've 20 staff, you get 19 contracts returned signed. One guy, he lost it, he'll bring it in next week, he left it in the van, the dog ate it, the usual. Do not waste your time. Break down the legislation. What does the legislation state? You must offer and make available a signed agreement, signed by a director or an owner, pushed across the table. Then on the Friday, maybe you do that on a Monday, by Friday at 12 p.m, I would send an email out to say, on Monday, whatever date, I offered and made available a written contract of employment. You haven't returned it. I now have deemed that you've accepted the terms and conditions offered. That will sign it off for you. It's not an ideal scenario. We would love everyone to sign their contracts and return them. However, these are human beings who have a life outside of work, so things happen. But that is your first line of protection before you aspire to, cultures or benefits or anything else. You've got to start with that. I would also say the contract of employment, please don't use Dr. Google. for your contract of employment. I remember years ago having a WRC and keeping it very brief, and this is a fact, where an employer ended up, he was a Dublin man with a whole load of independent supermarkets, not Pac McDonald's chipper. And he ended up in the Labour Relations Commission, as it was at the time, which is now the WRC. And a guy had taken him for an unfair dismissal, but one of the barristers, Kevin, was reading through the handbook, and he found a policy, and this is the truth, that spoke about the right of detention. So I was reading on further, and he said, "Where did you get this?" And he said, "I got it off Google." But when we read through it fully, it spoke about the dimensions of the room. It spoke about returning the goods in either livestock or, it was crazy. It was something that governed I think it was Papua New Guinea. It was something he had just downloaded and thought it looked good, grand, roll it out. Not a good idea. You got to make sure your documentation will work for you. That's what I always say. You'll get back out of it what you put into it. If you just download something from the internet, you know, really, can you be reliant on standing up in a WRC case and saying, you know what, I'm going to stand over that policy? Handbooks are the best. A little tip for you on handbooks. The legislation on handbooks are a little bit different compared to contracts of employment. So contracts of employment, if you amend them, will, sorry there, Maria's telling me to be quiet, so I'll have to hurry up. You can only change them with a bilateral opinion, or sorry, a bilateral signature, but the handbook, you can do it unanimously. We also do a little bit of training. The legislative changes this year have been huge. And we had a lovely WRC case which EMA researched, but I'm not going to tell you about it. What I would say to you is, there are my details up there. To finish up, if anybody has a query, please send me an email, or you can pop a phone call or WhatsApp to me anytime. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you do have. I did have business cards with me today, but my bad, I didn't proofread them and the wrong email is on them, so I don't have any with them. So I won't bore you anymore, and I'd like to thank you for your time, but we would be more than happy to help any startups, existing business with any queries. And thanks for taking the time to listen to me. Thank you.